She was cast out by her own blood, given to a poor farmer as punishment for her shame. But in his calloused hands and quiet eyes, she found what her gilded world never offered: unconditional love. The carriage wheels groaned to a halt on the sun-bleached road, dust rising in small clouds around the weathered wood. Penelope stared through the small window at the landscape before her, a patchwork of dry fields stretching toward a horizon, broken only by the silhouette of aging barns and a modest farmhouse. The air smelled of hay and distant livestock, so different from the rose gardens and polished marble of her father's estate. She had not spoken a word since leaving Thornfield Manor that morning. There was nothing left to say. Her father's voice still echoed in her mind, cold and final as winter stone. "You have disgraced this family. You will marry the farmer Caleb Mercer, and you will never set foot in this house again." The door opened. Her mother's lady's maid, the only servant permitted to accompany her on this journey, stood with eyes cast downward. Even she could not meet Penelope's gaze. Whether from pity or shared humiliation, it was impossible to say. "Miss Penelope," the woman whispered, "we've arrived." Penelope gathered her skirts, the fine fabric already dulled by road dust, and stepped down onto the hard-packed earth. The sun beat mercilessly overhead, and she raised one gloved hand to shield her eyes. A figure emerged from the shadow of the largest barn, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the unhurried gait of a man accustomed to long days and longer silences. Caleb Mercer stopped a respectful distance away, removing his worn hat. His face was weathered by sun and labor, his hands scarred and strong. But his eyes held something unexpected, a quiet gentleness that made Penelope's carefully constructed armor of indifference waver for just a moment. "Miss Thornfield," he said, his voice low and steady. "Welcome, welcome," as if she had chosen to be here, as if this were anything other than exile. The maid curtsied quickly and climbed back into the carriage. Penelope watched it pull away, leaving her alone with this stranger, who was now, by decree of church and contract, her husband. They had been married that very morning in the chapel at Thornfield Manor, a ceremony attended only by the priest, 2 witnesses, and her father's stone-faced solicitor. Her mother had not come. Her younger sister had been forbidden to say goodbye. "Your trunk will arrive tomorrow," Caleb said, breaking the heavy silence. "For tonight, I've prepared the room upstairs. It's modest, but clean." Penelope finally looked directly at him. "I suppose you find this amusing? The daughter of Harrison Thornfield, delivered to your doorstep like some unwanted parcel." His expression didn't change. "No, ma'am, I don't find any of this amusing." "Then why agree to it? What could my father possibly have offered you to make this arrangement worthwhile?" Caleb turned his hat slowly in his hands, considering his words. "Your father cleared my debts. The land is mine again, free and clear. But that's not why I said yes." "Then why?" He met her eyes again, and in that gaze she saw something that made her breath catch. Not desire, not triumph, but simple humanity. "Because I figured you might need somewhere to go, somewhere without judgment, and I could offer that at least." The words hung in the air between them, unexpected and disarming. Penelope had prepared herself for many things: resentment, mockery, even cruelty, but not kindness, never kindness. Before she could respond, an older man appeared from the farmhouse, wiping his hands on a faded apron. His face was lined with years of outdoor work, but his smile was genuine. "Caleb, you going to leave the lady standing in the heat all afternoon?" he called out. "Bring her inside, son. I've got fresh water drawn and bread still warm from the oven." "That's Henry," Caleb explained. "He helps with the farm, lives in the cottage beyond the west field. Good man, known him since I was small." Henry approached and gave a small, courteous bow. "Welcome, Mrs. Mercer. We're plain folk here, but you'll find no shortage of respect under this roof." Mrs. Mercer. The name sounded foreign to her ears. Penelope Thornfield had ceased to exist the moment her father's hand had signed those papers. She was someone else now, someone without title, without family name, without the life she had always known. Caleb gestured toward the house. "Shall we?" Penelope walked forward, her shoes crunching on the dry earth. The farmhouse was simple, whitewashed wood with a covered porch and window boxes that had once held flowers but now sat empty. As she climbed the 3 steps to the door, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window glass. The elaborate morning dress she'd been married in looked absurd here, like a peacock in a chicken yard. Inside, the house was sparse but surprisingly neat. A large wooden table dominated the main room, flanked by simple chairs. Shelves held basic dishes and a few books, far fewer than the library at Thornfield Manor, but carefully kept. The floor was swept clean, and through the doorway she could see a modest kitchen where a pot simmered over the fire. "The room upstairs is yours," Caleb said quietly. "I sleep in the small room off the kitchen. You'll have privacy. I give you my word." Penelope turned to face him, searching his expression for signs of deception, but she found only that same steady calm, that quiet certainty. It unnerved her more than anger would have. "I don't understand you," she said finally. "I don't expect you to. Not yet." He set his hat on a peg by the door. "Henry's right. You should eat something. The journey from Thornfield is long." "I'm not hungry." "Maybe not, but you should try anyway." He moved toward the kitchen, then paused. "I know this isn't what you wanted. I know you think your life is over. But maybe," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully, "maybe it's just different now. Not ended. Different." Penelope watched him disappear into the kitchen, leaving her standing in the center of that simple room, displaced and disoriented. Through the window, she could see the barn where they kept livestock, the fields that needed tending, the endless sky stretching out over a world that had become, overnight, her entire existence. She sank into one of the wooden chairs, her elaborate dress pooling around her like the ruins of her former life. And for the first time since her father had pronounced his judgment, Penelope allowed herself to feel the weight of what had happened. Not anger, not pride, but something deeper and more frightening. Loss. Complete and irrevocable loss. But also, perhaps, the first trembling note of something else, something she didn't yet have a name for. The first days passed like a fever dream. Penelope woke each morning to the sound of roosters crowing and the distant lowing of cattle, sounds that had never penetrated the thick walls of Thornfield Manor. The room Caleb had given her was simple, a bed with a patchwork quilt, a small dresser, and a window that looked out over the eastern fields. No silk curtains, no vanity table, no maid arriving with hot water and pressed clothing. She was alone, truly alone for the first time in her life. On the 3rd morning, she descended the narrow stairs to find Caleb already gone to the fields and Henry setting out a modest breakfast. Porridge, bread, and fresh milk in a plain ceramic jug. "Morning, Mrs. Mercer," Henry said cheerfully. "Caleb's been up since before dawn. Man works harder than any 3 men I've known." Penelope took a seat at the table, her movements stiff and uncertain. Everything about this place required her to be different, to be less than what she was raised to be. Or perhaps, she thought bitterly, to be exactly what her father had always believed she was, worthless. "He doesn't have to work so hard on my account," she said quietly. Henry laughed, a warm sound that filled the kitchen. "Lord, child, he's not working hard because of you. He's working hard because that's who he is, always has been. His father died when Caleb was barely old enough to hold a plough, left him this land and a mountain of debt. The boy worked himself near to death, keeping it." He poured her a cup of milk. "Your father's money cleared that debt, gave Caleb something he ain't had in years, hope." The words settled over Penelope like an unexpected weight. She had assumed Caleb married her for profit, for the advantage of aligning himself with the Thornfield name, however tarnished she might be. But debt, freedom from burden, that was something else entirely. Why didn't he just sell the land, she asked. Because it was his father's, because a man's land is his legacy, his place in the world. Henry sat down across from her, his weathered hands wrapped around his own cup. "Your people measure worth in titles and ballrooms. Our people measure it in harvests and honest labor. Different worlds, same hunger to matter. Penelope looked down at the simple food before her. In the manor, breakfast had been an elaborate affair, imported preserves, delicate pastries, silver service. This porridge was plain, unsweetened, functional, but as she took her first hesitant bite, she found it wasn't unpleasant, just different. That afternoon she stood at the window of her room, watching Caleb work in the distant field. Even from this distance she could see the steady rhythm of his labor, the swing of the scythe, the gathering of cut grain. He never seemed to tire, never seemed to pause unnecessarily. There was a kind of poetry in it, though she would never have said so aloud. A knock at the front door startled her from her observation. Henry answered it, and Penelope heard a woman's voice, sharp, cultured, unmistakably from her former world. Her heart sank. She descended the stairs slowly, already knowing who had come. In the doorway stood Victoria Ashford, a distant cousin and one of the most vicious gossips in their social circle. Victoria's eyes swept the modest interior of the farmhouse with barely concealed disgust. "Penelope," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "I simply had to see for myself. When I heard what your father had done—" "What do you want, Victoria?" The other woman's smile was sharp as cut glass. "I wanted to bring you news from home. Your sister Margaret is engaged to Lord Whitmore, a very advantageous match. Your mother is planning the most elaborate wedding the county has ever seen." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I'm sure you'll be invited. Though I suppose you'd look rather out of place now, wouldn't you?" Penelope felt the familiar burn of shame rising in her chest, but before she could respond, Caleb's voice came from behind Victoria. "Can I help you, Ma'am?" He had come from the fields, still dusty from work, and stood in the doorway with quiet authority. Victoria turned, taking in his simple clothing and work-roughened appearance with obvious disdain. "I was just visiting Mrs. Mercer," she said coolly, "offering condolences on her circumstances." "That's kind of you." Caleb's tone was polite, but firm. "But we're about to sit down to supper." "If there's nothing else." Victoria's eyes flashed with irritation at being dismissed by someone she clearly considered beneath her station. "Of course, I wouldn't want to intrude on your domestic arrangements." She turned back to Penelope. "Do give my regards to your family. Oh, wait, I suppose you can't, can you?" She swept out, leaving a wake of expensive perfume and cutting words. The silence that followed was heavy. Penelope stood frozen in the center of the room, her hands clenched into fists. She felt exposed, humiliated, as if Victoria's visit had stripped away whatever thin dignity she'd managed to construct in this place. "That woman's got more poison than a nest of vipers," Henry muttered from the kitchen doorway. But it was Caleb's voice that broke through Penelope's spiraling thoughts. "You all right?" She couldn't look at him. "Why would you care? You heard her. I'm ruined. An embarrassment. My own sister is getting married while I'm—" Her voice broke. "While I'm here. You say that like here is the worst place in the world, isn't it?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "Look at this place, Caleb. Look at what I've become. I was raised for drawing rooms and society dinners, not chicken coops and fields." He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd heard it. "You were raised for a life that never saw you, really saw you. Here, you can be whatever you choose. Not what your father decided, not what women like her think you should be. Just yourself." Penelope finally met his eyes, and what she saw there stole her breath. Not pity, not judgment, just a steady, patient understanding that somehow cut deeper than Victoria's cruelty ever could. "I don't even know who that is anymore," she whispered. "Then maybe that's where we start." He moved toward the kitchen. "Come, eat. Henry's made his rabbit stew. It's not fancy, but it's honest." As Penelope followed him into the modest kitchen, she felt something shift inside her, subtle as a key turning in a lock. Victoria's visit had been meant to remind her of everything she'd lost. But standing in this simple farmhouse, Watching Caleb ladle stew into chipped bowls with the same care he might show fine china, Penelope began to wonder if perhaps she hadn't lost everything. Perhaps she'd simply been given the chance to find something different. Outside, the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the fields in shades of amber and gold. And for the first time since arriving at this place, Penelope sat down at the table without being asked, accepting the bowl Caleb offered her with something that might have been gratitude. The fourth morning arrived with a soft rain pattering against the roof, the kind of gentle summer storm that soaked the earth without violence. Penelope woke to the sound and lay still for a moment, listening. At Thornfield Manor, rain had meant cancelled garden parties and irritated servants. Here she was learning it meant something different: relief, gratitude, the promise of crops growing strong. She dressed in one of the simple dresses that had arrived with her trunk, a plain cotton affair that would have scandalized her former lady's maid. As she descended the stairs, she found Caleb at the table, studying a worn ledger by lamplight. He looked up as she entered, and something in his expression told her he'd been expecting her. "Morning," he said quietly. "Coffee's still hot." Penelope poured herself a cup, the bitter warmth spreading through her chest. "You're not working today? Can't plough in this rain. Tears up the soil wrong." He closed the ledger, pushing it aside. "Thought I'd mend some tools, check the barn roof. Small things." She sat down across from him, cradling the cup in both hands. For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain filled the silence between them, not uncomfortable but full of unspoken questions. "Henry told me you've been up here every morning since I arrived," Penelope said finally, "watching to make sure I eat breakfast." Caleb's expression didn't change, but she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, caught, perhaps, or simply acknowledged. "Habit. I check on things that matter. I'm not livestock to be checked on." "No, you're my wife, that's different." He met her gaze steadily. "You're not eating enough. You're not sleeping well. I hear you pacing at night, and you're hurting in ways I can't fix, but I can make sure there's food on the table and that you know you're not alone here. That much I can do." The simple honesty of it struck her like a physical blow. Penelope set down her cup, her hands trembling slightly. "Why are you kind to me? Why wouldn't I be? Because I'm—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. "Because of what I am, what I did." Caleb leaned back in his chair, studying her with that same patient attention he gave everything. "I don't know what you did, Penelope. Your father didn't tell me, and I didn't ask. All I know is what I see, a woman who's been cast out by people who should have protected her. That's enough. You should know." The words came out before she could stop them. "You should know what kind of person you've married." "All right, tell me." Penelope looked down at her hands, at the fine bones and soft skin that had never known real work. There was a man, Frederick. He was the younger son of an earl, handsome, charming. He paid attention to me at a time when— She paused, choosing her words carefully. "When I felt invisible. My sister was the beauty. I was the disappointment. But Frederick made me feel seen." The rain drummed steadily on the roof. Caleb said nothing, waiting. "We met in secret. Nothing improper, just walks in the garden, stolen conversations. He said he loved me, said he would speak to my father about an engagement." Her voice grew quieter. "But he never did. Instead, he became engaged to my cousin, Victoria's younger sister, a girl with a larger dowry and better prospects. And your father found out about the meetings. My mother did. She told my father I'd been compromised, that I'd disgraced the family name by consorting with a man unsuitable for marriage, even though Frederick was far above my station. Apparently, I was too beneath his." Penelope's laugh was bitter. "Father couldn't marry me off properly after that. No respectable man would have me. So he found the only option left, a farmer who needed money badly enough to take damaged goods." The silence that followed was heavy. Penelope waited for judgment, for the confirmation that yes, she was worthless, ruined, exactly what her father had called her. Instead, Caleb stood and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked fields. When he spoke, his voice was rough with barely contained anger, but not at her. "Your father's a fool," he said flatly, "and that Frederick is worse than a fool. He's a coward. You trusted someone, and they used that trust to hurt you. That's not your shame. That's theirs." Penelope stood, moving toward him without thinking. "You don't understand. In my world, a woman's reputation is everything. I broke the rules. Rules designed to keep women quiet and powerless." He turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes took her breath away. "You know what I see when I look at you, Penelope? Not some ruined woman. I see someone who's been told her whole life that she's not enough, not pretty enough, not valuable enough, not worthy enough. And I see someone who's still standing despite all of it. I'm not strong. I'm here because I have nowhere else to go. Strength isn't about having choices. It's about surviving when you don't." He took a step closer, close enough that she could smell the rain and earth on his clothes. "You survived your father's house. You survived that man's betrayal. You came here expecting cruelty and found the courage to stay anyway. That's strength." Penelope felt something break open inside her chest, something she'd kept locked away since the moment her father had pronounced her worthless. Tears burned behind her eyes, and she turned away quickly, not wanting him to see. But his hand caught her shoulder, gentle but firm. "You don't have to hide here, not from me." The kindness undid her completely. Penelope pressed her hands to her face as the tears came, not delicate, ladylike tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. And Caleb, this man who barely knew her, who had every reason to see her as the burden her father claimed she was, simply stood beside her and let her cry. When the storm inside her finally subsided, she found herself sitting at the table again, a clean handkerchief in her hands that Caleb had quietly provided. He sat across from her, not speaking, just present. "I don't know how to be a farmer's wife," she said finally, her voice hoarse. "I don't know how to do any of this." "Then I'll teach you, if you want to learn." "Why would you do that?" Caleb smiled for the first time since she'd arrived, a small, genuine expression that transformed his entire face. "Because teaching's easier than doing everything myself, and because I think you're stronger than you know. Might as well find out if I'm right." Outside, the rain began to ease, giving way to pale sunlight breaking through the clouds. And in that simple farmhouse kitchen, something shifted between them. Not love, not yet, but the first fragile foundation upon which love might someday be built. Trust. The weeks that followed brought changes Penelope could never have imagined. Caleb kept his word, teaching her the rhythms of farm life with patient determination. She learned to gather eggs from the hen house, her initial fear of the sharp-beaked birds giving way to cautious competence. She discovered how to knead bread dough, her soft hands gradually developing small calluses that she found herself oddly proud of. Henry showed her which herbs grew wild near the creek and how to preserve them for winter medicines. The work was hard, often exhausting, but it carried something her old life had never offered: purpose. Each task completed meant something tangible: food on the table, eggs to sell at market, a garden that flourished under her increasingly confident care. One afternoon, as she worked alongside Caleb in the vegetable garden, pulling weeds from between rows of beans, he paused to watch her. She'd tied her hair back with a simple ribbon, her dress protected by one of his old shirts, and dirt smudged her cheek where she'd pushed back a stray lock of hair. "What?" she asked, catching his gaze. "Nothing. Just, you look different. More yourself." Penelope sat back on her heels, considering this. "I feel different. At Thornfield, I spent hours getting dressed each morning, learning to walk properly, to speak properly, to be the right kind of ornament for someone's drawing room. Here I spend hours making things grow. It's strange, but I think I prefer the dirt." Caleb smiled, that rare expression that still made her heart stumble slightly. Dirt's honest. Can't pretend to be something it's not. Their hands were close on the earth between them, and for a moment neither moved. Then Henry's voice called from the barn, breaking the spell, and they returned to work. That evening, as Penelope prepared supper, a skill she'd learned with surprising aptitude, a familiar carriage appeared on the road. Her stomach tightened with recognition even before the door opened and her mother stepped out, elegant and cold as winter marble. "Mamma," Penelope breathed, wiping her hands on her apron. Eleanor Thornfield surveyed the farmhouse with barely concealed distaste. She was accompanied by the family solicitor, a thin man with papers clutched to his chest like armor. "Penelope," her mother's voice held no warmth. "I've come with a proposition." Caleb emerged from the barn, Henry close behind. He moved to stand beside Penelope, not touching but present, a silent declaration of solidarity. "Mrs. Thornfield," he said evenly, "what brings you here?" Eleanor's eyes flicked over him with dismissive assessment. "I'm here to correct a mistake. My husband acted rashly in his anger. I've convinced him to reconsider the situation." Penelope's heart began to pound. "Reconsider?" The solicitor stepped forward, unfolding a document. "Your father is prepared to offer an annulment of this marriage. You would return to Thornfield Manor under certain conditions, a period of seclusion, restricted social activities, but eventually a chance to rebuild your reputation. There's a widower, a merchant with connections, who might be persuaded to overlook your indiscretions if properly compensated." "You're offering to buy her back," Caleb said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm offering her a future," Eleanor corrected sharply. "Look at her, Mr. Mercer. My daughter was not raised for this life. She's suffering here, pretending to be something she's not. This is mercy." Penelope stood frozen between two worlds. The world of her birth, offering conditional acceptance and hollow propriety, and this new world of honest labor and unexpected belonging. Her mother's words echoed the doubts that still whispered in her mind during sleepless nights. Was she truly choosing this life, or simply enduring it because she had no alternative? "Penelope." Her mother's voice softened slightly, the closest to affection Eleanor Thornfield could manage. "Come home. This was never meant to be permanent. You've learned your lesson. It's time to return to your proper place." "Her proper place is here," Caleb said, but Penelope laid a hand on his arm, stopping him. "I need to speak with my mother alone," she said quietly. Something flickered in Caleb's eyes, hurt perhaps or fear, but he nodded and stepped back. Henry guided him toward the barn, leaving Penelope to face her mother in the growing twilight. "You've changed," Eleanor observed, studying her daughter with clinical detachment. "You look common." "I look happy," Penelope corrected. "Can you tell the difference?" "Happiness is a luxury, Penelope. Security, reputation, a proper place in society, these are necessities. What will you have here? A life of drudgery, bearing children who will never know anything beyond these fields? You were meant for more than this." "I was meant to be invisible," Penelope said, each word emerging with newfound clarity. "A decorative accessory to some man's ambitions. Here, I'm seen. Every day, I'm seen. By a farmer." Her mother's tone made it sound like an insult. "By people who don't matter. They matter to me." Penelope looked toward the barn where Caleb had disappeared. "He matters to me." Eleanor's expression hardened. "You're being sentimental. This man married you for money, not love. The novelty of farm life will wear off, and you'll be trapped in poverty and obscurity forever. Is that truly what you want?" For a long moment, Penelope didn't answer. The question wasn't simple, and she respected it enough not to give a simple answer. She thought about the exhaustion that came with physical labor, the simplicity of meals, the absence of luxury. But she also thought about Caleb's steady presence, Henry's grandfatherly kindness, the satisfaction of bread rising under her own hands, the way the sunrise looked over fields she helped tend. "I don't know if I love him yet," she said finally, "but I know he's never lied to me, never tried to make me into something I'm not, and I know that the person I'm becoming here—" She looked down at her work-worn hands. She's someone I might actually be able to live with. That's more than I ever had at Thornfield Manor." "You're a fool," her mother said coldly. "Perhaps, but I'm my own fool now." Penelope straightened her shoulders, feeling the strength in muscles earned through honest work. "Tell father the answer is no. I'm staying." Eleanor Thornfield stared at her daughter as if seeing a stranger. Then, without another word, she turned and climbed back into the carriage. The solicitor followed, tucking away his rejected documents, and they rolled away into the gathering darkness. Penelope stood alone in the yard, trembling not with fear, but with the enormity of what she'd done. She had chosen, not passively accepted, but actively chosen. Caleb emerged from the barn, crossing the distance between them slowly. "You sent her away." "I did." "Why?" Penelope met his eyes, and in them she saw everything she needed. "Because Mercy isn't returning to a life that never wanted me. Mercy is being allowed to build a new one, with you, if you'll have me." Something profound shifted in Caleb's expression. He reached out, taking her work-roughened hand in his own, and raised it slowly to his lips, not a passionate gesture, but one of deep respect, of partnership, acknowledged and accepted. "I think," he said quietly, "we might already be building it." Above them, the first stars emerged in a sky vast and clear, and Penelope felt, for the first time in her life, truly free. The harvest season arrived with its golden promise, and Penelope found herself standing in the midst of transformation, not just of the land, but of herself. Months had passed since her mother's carriage had rolled away into the darkness, and in that time, something remarkable had taken root. She woke now before dawn without being called, moving through the farmhouse with quiet confidence. Her hands, once soft and decorative, had grown strong and capable. She could judge the temperature of bread dough by touch alone, could predict rain by the smell of the air, could calm a skittish horse with patience and gentle words. The woman who had arrived here in elaborate silk and crushing shame had been replaced by someone she was only beginning to fully know, but someone she genuinely liked. On market day, she rode into town beside Caleb, the wagon bed filled with vegetables from their garden, eggs packed carefully in straw, and jars of preserves she'd learned to make under Henry's patient instruction. The town of Millbrook had been wary of her at first, the disgraced noblewoman married to one of their own, but time and honest work had slowly worn away their suspicion. "Mrs. Mercer," called out Martha Finnegan, the baker's wife, waving from her stall. "I saved you some of that cinnamon I mentioned for your apple butter recipe." Penelope smiled, climbing down from the wagon. "You're a blessing, Martha. I'll trade you 2 jars when it's ready." As she set up their stall, arranging produce with an eye for presentation that came from her old life but served her new one well, she felt Caleb's gaze on her. She looked up to find him watching with that expression she'd come to treasure. Not possessive, not demanding, but simply appreciative, seeing her truly. "What?" she asked, echoing their exchange from months ago. "Just thinking how natural you look doing this, like you've been doing it your whole life. Sometimes it feels that way, like the person I was before was just rehearsing, and this is the real performance." She straightened a basket of beans. "Does that sound strange?" "No, it sounds true." The morning passed in the comfortable rhythm of commerce and community. Penelope negotiated prices with confidence, accepted compliments on her preserves with genuine pleasure, and found herself genuinely laughing at old Samuel Porter's terrible jokes about his stubborn mule. She belonged here, not because she'd been forced to accept it, but because she'd chosen it, worked for it, earned it. Then, as the sun reached its zenith, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the market square. Margaret, Penelope's younger sister, stood frozen, staring at her with wide eyes. She was dressed in the height of fashion, clearly visiting Millbrook with her new husband, Lord Whitmore, who stood behind her looking thoroughly uncomfortable among the common folk. For a moment the sisters simply looked at each other across the crowded market. Then Margaret moved forward slowly, as if approaching something wild that might bolt. "Penelope," she whispered, They told me you were here, but I didn't believe that I was still alive." Penelope kept her voice gentle. "Or that I was happy." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I wanted to visit. Father forbade it. Mother said—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "You look so different." "I am different." Penelope glanced at her work-worn hands, then back at her sister. "I'm better. Father says you threw away everything for a farmer, that you've gone mad." "Father sees only what he wants to see." Penelope reached out, touching her sister's perfectly gloved hand. "I threw away a life that was killing me slowly. I found one that lets me breathe." Margaret looked around at the simple market stall, at Caleb standing quietly nearby, at the townspeople who greeted Penelope with genuine warmth. "But you were going to marry someone important. Have a real life." "This is a real life, Maggie. Maybe the first real one I've ever had." Her sister's face crumpled. "I miss you. The house is so empty without you. Mother never smiles. Father—" She lowered her voice. "Father drinks more than he used to. And I'm married to a man who only wanted the dowry and barely speaks to me." Penelope's heart ached for her sister, trapped in the very life she'd escaped. She pulled Margaret into an embrace, feeling the rigid whalebone of her corset, the weight of propriety that still imprisoned her. "You always have a place here," she whispered, "if you ever need one. No judgment, just space to be yourself." When they separated, Lord Whitmore was gesturing impatiently. Margaret nodded, squeezing Penelope's hands once more before turning away. But she looked back twice as she left, and in her eyes was something Penelope recognized. The first stirring of questions, the beginning of doubt about the life she'd been told to want. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Penelope and Caleb sat together on the porch of their home. The day's earnings were counted and stored, the animals fed and settled, the house quiet around them. Henry had retired to his cottage, leaving them in companionable silence. "Your sister seemed nice," Caleb said finally. "She is. And trapped." Penelope leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture that had become natural over the months. "I hope she finds her way out someday." "You found yours." "No. You gave me mine." She turned to look up at him, this man who had offered her refuge when her own blood had cast her out. "I need to tell you something." His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "All right. When I first came here, I thought this was punishment, the end of my life. I was so angry, so lost." She paused, gathering courage. "But somewhere along the way, between learning to bake bread and pull weeds and understand the land, I stopped grieving who I was, and I started becoming who I was meant to be." "I know." I watched it happen. "I'm not finished." She sat up, facing him fully. "I fell in love with you, Caleb Mercer, not because you saved me, but because you let me save myself, because you see me, really see me, and like what you see, because your hands are honest and your heart is good, and I would choose this life, choose you 1,000 times over." The silence that followed was profound. Then Caleb raised their joined hands, pressing his lips to her knuckles, that same gesture of respect from months ago, but laden now with everything unspoken between them. "Penelope," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I loved you the first time you chose to stay. When your mother offered you everything back, and you chose this, chose us, I knew I'd been given something I didn't deserve, but would spend my life earning. You're the bravest person I've ever known." "Kiss me," she whispered, "not as a husband fulfilling duty, but as a man who loves his wife." He cupped her face in his calloused palms and kissed her with a tenderness that made her whole body sing. It was not passionate in the dramatic sense. There were no grand gestures or theatrical proclamations. It was simply real, honest, true. When they separated, the stars had begun emerging in the darkening sky. Caleb pulled her close, and they sat together watching the night settle over their land, their home, while crickets sang their evening chorus, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of ripening grain. "Thank you," Penelope said softly. For what? For being exactly who you are. For giving me the chance to become exactly who I'm meant to be. His arms tightened around her. We gave each other that. And in that moment, Penelope understood the deepest truth of her journey. She had not been punished by being sent here. She had been freed. The gilded cage of nobility had been replaced by the vast sky of possibility. The hollow approval of society had been replaced by the solid warmth of genuine love. She had lost everything her father valued and found everything that truly mattered. She was home. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because this was where she chose to be. With this man, on this land, in this simple, beautiful, absolutely real life. And that choice, freely made and wholly embraced, was the greatest triumph of all.